Don't have to be beautiful to turn me on. I just need your body, baby, from dusk till dawn. You just need to be my love, will be your fool. Yeah, you don't have to be fresh to be my girl. You don't have to be cool to rule my world. I just want your extra time, your kiss.
Whoa. Just want your kiss. You know, I don't know. I just like, who doesn't love a little Prince every once in a while? You know what I'm saying? Like Prince, like 3 people. Yeah, we like Prince. Okay, never mind. Hey, my name's TJ. I'm one of the pastors here. We're so glad that you're with us at Coastal this morning. We're beginning a brand new series called Uncovered, and we're talking about love and sex and dating and marriage and relationships. And here's the deal. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking. We're going to be talking to men. We're going to be talking to women. We're going to be talking to single people. We're going to be talking to married people. We're going to be talking to single ladies. You know, maybe some Beyonce will be up here. You know what I'm saying? You know, we'll throw a little bit of that up here, whatever. But throughout this time, we're going to have an opportunity. We would love for you to text in some questions to us about what are some things that you would like to know about relationships? What are some things you would like to know about dating and sex? And you know what? We're going to try to answer those questions throughout this series to make sure that we're giving you what you want and what you're looking for as it pertains to relationships. And today what I wanted to do is I just wanted to kind of set out and start off this series and talk about one thing that I think that if we were to pull back the sheets on in relationships, if we were to go and we were to take a deeper look at it, would be the one thing that would probably help relationships the most, and is also the one thing that's probably hurting most of your relationships the most. And it doesn't matter whether you're single or you're married, the principles that we're going to talk about throughout this series are going to apply to you. So when you hear a relationship series, all the single people automatically go, well, I can check out for the next 30 or 40 minutes and I don't really have to pay attention. Listen. Single person, this is the best time in your entire life to learn how to do things right so that when you do get in a relationship, you don't make the mistakes that all the married people have already made. Like, that's wisdom right there. And so our hope for you is that we're going to equip you to be ready to roll into a relationship. For married people, we're going to help you discover some things in your relationship that are only going to enhance where you're going to go and how it's going to move and what it's going to look like for the future of you. And this is what I know about all of our relationships. All of our relationships are fueled by communication. Communication is definitely the number one thing in relationships that makes relationships happen. And when we're in that dating phase, it seems like communication is so easy to do. Like, it's no problem. Ladies, I don't know why this is, but a guy will sit on the phone with you for 4 hours and just listen to you breathe. Like, when you get married, he doesn't want to listen to you talk, okay? But like when you're dating, like, you'll just listen forever and you'll have these deep and awesome conversations. But something happens the moment that you say, I do. It's like communication ceases. Like, I've heard everything about you and I don't want to talk anymore. And all the married people are snickering because they know that that's true. Like, they know that's what's up in relationships. That's what happens. And so, like, where does it go wrong and why does that happen? And I read some statistics this week that kind of blew my mind. You know, I mean, there's always the big ones that 50% of marriages end in divorce, and we've all heard that. But the reason that is so high is because 86% of women say, man, my husband just doesn't talk to me the way that I would want him to talk to me. Like, he doesn't listen in conversation. He doesn't communicate back his feelings. In fact, kids, I found this, 1 in 4 kids said, man, I've never had like a significant conversation with my dad. Like, that's pretty trying, the fact that kids aren't having those kind of conversations. The average couple in America today that is married talks an average of 4 minutes of healthy conversation a day. Like, those are some staggering stats that are out there that are going about, and we're wondering why we're struggling so much in relationships. We're wondering why there is this breakdown, and we're trying to uncover the secrets to succeed in our relationships. And so, you know, where do we go wrong? What is the part that goes wrong? And so what I did is I want you guys to see where most conversations go wrong in a relationship. So take a look at the screen and check this out.
It's just there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just.
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking?
Come on now, you know that that's what the conversation at home looks like right there. I mean, like, we got some issues in our conversation, don't we? I mean, we're not talking about the right things, and we're running into problems, and all these things are happening. And so my question for all of us today is where did all of this go wrong? Like, where did that go wrong? And I don't think it went wrong right there. I think we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to, like, right before the wedding, or maybe the wedding day, to discover what went wrong with that whole relationship and what's going wrong with a lot of our relationships today. Because I think a lot of us are dealing with this, where we're just running into these barriers, and we say, like, oh, that's your problem, and no, this is my problem. And really, we're missing out on exactly what the problem is. And this is what happens, is when we're all getting ready to get married, or we're thinking about marriage, all of us kind of roll into marriage with some desires. All of us kind of roll into marriage with some dreams. We all have some ideas of what we want our marriage to look like. I mean, some of us, we have some ideas of like what we're going to drive. Like we have some dreams about someday, like we're going to be a redneck and we're going to drive a truck and it's going to be awesome. And we have some dreams and we think about someday we're going to live somewhere, and maybe you want to live overseas. And so like you're thinking about your future and you're dreaming about it, and you're like, man, I would love to do that. And so you have these desires to move into a house or into a winery over in Rome or wherever you want to live. And you go through time and you have some desires of what your spouse is going to do around the house. Like, what are some of the roles that they're going to have around the house, and what are some of the roles that you're going to have? Maybe you have some desires about what is going to look like every night for you. Guys, like what it's going to be like. And let me just say this, single guys, because every single guy, what you think is you think, man, as soon as I get married, I get to have sex all the time. Yeah, some of y'all are like, preach. Let me just tell you something. If you think your relationship's all going to be about sex, you got another thing coming to you, because after you've spent your 30 seconds having sex, like you're going to have 23 hours and 59 minutes and 30 seconds to have a relationship with that person. And so like you have some desires rolling into your relationship of what that's going to look like. Maybe you have some desires of how many kids you're going to have and whether they're going to be boys or they're going to be girls, and maybe about how you're going to spend your time. Like, where are you going to spend your time? Are you going to spend all of your time together as a couple, or are you going to have some time for you and your friends and they're going to have some time for their friends, or are you going to have your friends merge, or are you never going to let your friends meet? I don't know what it is, but we all have some desires about how we're going to spend our time, and we have some desires about, like, man, how much money we're going to make, and how we're going to save, and how we're going to invest, and what our future is going to look like as far as our finances. We have these desires, and then we also have some desires as far as what our spouse is going to wear to bed at night. And this is more reality, guys. And you know, and like, maybe, guys, this isn't your dream, but listen, your wife is just thinking, man, he wants me to be comfortable. And of course, because I'm so in love, like I'm just gonna desire for her to be comfortable every night. And so we go into marriage, and we have all these desires, and these desires are good things, and they're healthy things, and we want those things, and we've been planning for those things, and the thing that all of these desires have in common is they're all about the things that I want. It's all about me and my desires and my dream for my relationship. And here's the thing, like the Bible is very clear that when we become married, it's a little bit different. In fact, this is what Mark 10, 6-9 says, but God made them male and female from the very beginning. Basically he's saying, listen, men and women are different. If you haven't figured that out yet, like God is explaining it, y'all are different right here. Then he goes, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. And this is what happens in our relationships. Each one of us come into our relationship, whether we're single or we're dating right now or we're married, and we all come into our relationship with desires of how we want our relationship to work. How do I want my relationship to look, and what do I expect from my relationship? And so we automatically come in with all of these things, and they're not bad things in and of themselves. I mean, these are good things. They're healthy things. They're not things that are extraordinary. They're just normal desires that every single person has when it comes to relationships. And in fact, before we got married, we even talked about this stuff, didn't we? We talked about all of this stuff, and we discussed it, and we thought about it. And then when we got married, when we walked down the aisle along with the flower girl and the rings and the ceremony, we walked down with all of these desires. We said, man, someday, like now that we're about to get married, all of these desires are going to come true. And somewhere in the middle of the wedding ceremony or the month after marriage or the year after marriage, something starts to happen. These desires that started out good and healthy start to change. The desires for kids and what we're going to drive and what she's going to wear. Hopefully it's not he's going to wear that. And whose roles and how we're going to spend our time. They start to shift, and they start to shift from good, healthy desires, and they start to go into another category. They start to change, and they go into another box, and before long, they become expectations. They become expectations where desires were these healthy things, and I don't really know how it happens or why it happens, where we went from, like, they were my boyfriend and they were my girlfriend, and man, I just desired for this to happen, to all of a sudden they're my spouse, and now I expect these things to be taking place in my relationship, and there's nothing wrong with desires as long as they're just desires, but when they shift from this box over to this box, all of a sudden it starts wrecking our relationships, because we have these two people that have these two different desires, and all of a sudden they're saying, listen, I don't desire for you to do these things anymore. I expect you to do this for me. Like, I don't just hope that this happens in my relationship. Now I demand this in my relationship. I demand that you meet these expectations. And the other person looks over and says, man, I demand that you meet these expectations. And when we start having that, what happens is these expectations collide, and what happens in that moment is we have some choices to make. For a lot of us, when they collide, our natural inclination is we leave. We just run away. It's easier to get away. We go, you know what? I can't meet your expectations. Like, I can't get to that level. And because I can't get to that level, I'm just going to go, and I'm going to go somewhere else, and I'm going to take my desires with me, and I'm going to go somewhere else. And the other person didn't quit, you quit. And what happens for a lot of us is when we leave, we pick up our desires and we go on to our next relationship, and we bring those same things in and we shift them from desires to expectations. And then we wonder why our second marriage looks exactly like our first marriage. Or our second marriage looks exactly like our third marriage or 27th marriage. And if we don't leave, then we have one of two options. For a lot of us, what we do is we end up conquering. One of us conquers the other one and says, listen, you have to be this for me. Like, you have to come and do these things. This is important. Like, and what you do is you start to challenge your spouse and you start to tell them like they have to conform to what you want them to be. And you say, man, you are going to do this, and whoever can explain their side better wins. And so what you say to them is like, you need to do this and you need to do this. And here's a key thought for you, man. If you're going to write something down, this is what you need to write down. You can Twitter this. It's really, really easy for you to be you. Like, nobody wrote that down. That's good right there. But it's really, really hard for you to be your spouse. And what happens when we conquer is we say to our spouse, you have to be me. You have to do what I want. And all of a sudden what happens is that spouse has all these expectations on it, and they might do that for a little bit. I mean, they might submit to that for a little bit, but before long, man, there's going to be some tension in that relationship, because it's really easy for you to be you, but it's very, very difficult for somebody else to be somebody that they're not. And so one of the spouses conquers, while the other spouse, you know what they do? They conform. They just become what the other person wants them to become. And what happens is that they start to take on the identity of the expectations that the other spouse has. And here's the problem with that, is that God created each and every one of us as individuals. We were handcrafted, we were handmade to be the person that God has called us to be. That's why he said there's a man and there's a woman in that scripture that we read before. And he said, man, I'm going to bring them together like two individuals to become one. And there's the individuality that comes together to make a whole person, because you have strengths and they have strengths, and you have weaknesses and they have weaknesses. And hopefully your strengths compensate for their weaknesses, and their strengths compensate for your weaknesses. But what you do when you make them conform is you cause them to disregard all their strengths and their weaknesses and just become. And this is my observation. I have no real stats on it or whatever. And you can do that for a little bit, but when you get to your 30s and your 40s, it becomes very, very hard to conform, and a lot of marriages end right there, because somebody is tired of being walked all over and trodden all over in their relationship over expectations. But the area where most people fall into is most people fall and they just end up compromising. They say, listen, if you do this, then I'll do that. If you do these things for me, then I'll do those things for you. And what happens is we start to compromise in the relationship, and it's a bargaining aspect where we're going, well, man, if you'll do this, if you'll take care of that, if you want me to do that, then like I want you to do this. And when you do that, then I'll go do that. And so we're constantly bargaining with one another, and we're saying, if you'll do that, then I'll do this. And the problem with that marriage is a compromised marriage is all about yourself. It's never about meeting the needs of the other person. It's all about meeting your expectations that you put on somebody else. And here's the problem with a compromised marriage. A compromised marriage is all about you. And what you know, how you know if you're having a compromised marriage is you'll start to say things like, well, I really care about my marriage. Like, I want my marriage to work out. And the problem with talking like that is it's still all about you in your relationship. Because this is what I know about relationships. Shayla doesn't want me committed to our marriage. Did y'all hear that? Married people, single people. Like, my spouse does not want me committed to a marriage because I can always go get another marriage. What my wife wants me committed to is her. Like, she doesn't want me committed to an institution. She wants me committed to a person. That's exactly how Jesus did it. Jesus came to die so that we could be committed not to this thing called Christianity, but to a person named Jesus. And what happens for a lot of us is we're so committed to the institution that we're saying, well, like, if you don't meet these, then I'll just go get another one of those. And what happens is when we don't look at that and we don't change that, and we just start compromising in our marriage, and we start saying, like, listen, if you'll do this, then I'll do that. What we have is we have a relationship with all the intimacy, where all the love, where all the community is gone, because it's no longer a covenant. Relationship where, like, I just want to do it because I love you. It's more about a contract and what you'll do for me. And that's a difficult thing. And you think back to when you were dating, you weren't doing it for yourself at the time. You were doing everything you could for that other person. Like you just want to show up with roses just to show them how much you love them. Today you won't show up with roses for anything. Like, where did it all go wrong? I love what 1 Peter, he kind of challenges us. He said, wives, in the same way, be submissive to your husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their lives. When they see the purity and reverence of your lives, and he talks to men a couple verses later in verse 7, he says, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. He's saying, listen, your relationship is not about a contract. It's not about if you do this, then they'll do that. It's all about you just go, you serve them, you love them, you respect them. If you'll go and do those things, like the benefits of that is because if it's a relationship, is they'll just naturally want to reciprocate those things. And there'll be health in that relationship, and there'll be desires within that relationship, and there'll be community within that relationship. There'll be love within that relationship. And there'll be this covenant that's there because it's not based on what you can do for me, but it's all about just the fact that I would just want to do because that's what I want to do to show you and express to you the love that I have within you. The problem is that when I go and I keep dumping all of these desires into expectations and I keep going, hey, this is what I expect of you, there can never be any love or intimacy or community in a relationship. It's just void whatsoever, because what's happening is that relationship is deteriorating. And anytime you have expectations in a relationship always create a debt-debtor relationship. They will always create a debt-debtor relationship. And this is so important to understand right here. This is so critical, because what happens is you go, you know what? You owe me. Husband, you owe me. Spouse, wife, you owe me. And anytime somebody owes you something, there is a debt to be repaid there. And so what happens a lot of times is you go, well, you know what? On our wedding day, you said you would do this and this and this, and you said that in front of friends and family, and so you better do that. You owe me. And they go, well, oh yeah, well, you on our wedding day said this and that and this and that in front of our friends, our family, and God. Throwing the God card out there. And you better do this or else. And we can go back, and all of us can go back and say, well, I have this note, or I have this letter, or I remember those vows. And we can all go, I remember that they owe me something because of that. And you say to yourself, am I not justified in thinking that my spouse owes me? Am I not justified in thinking that my husband owes me in doing those things? Am I not justified in thinking that my wife owes me in doing those things? And we can go through and do that. Like, you can justify those actions and those thoughts. But what happens when you do that is you totally decimate love, because there is no margin for love in a debt-debtor relationship. Because here's the deal. When I'm in a relationship and my expectations are there, when desires become expectations, this is what happens is I give you all the money in the world. Like, I go out and I get a job as a husband, and I make all the money in the world for you to be able to spend and go buy shoes and shop and all those things every day. You don't appreciate or love me at all for doing that, because when it's an expectation, every time I go and earn enough, all I'm doing is I'm hitting the minimum basic requirements of a relationship. Do you get that? Like, when you have an expectation on somebody, when they meet that expectation, when you expect your spouse to bring you roses all the time, and so when they bring you roses, you go, that's right, that's what you're supposed to be doing. Come on now, you know some of y'all think that way. Or you have an expectation on your spouse that when you get home, like, she's to have dinner on the table and have her lingerie on and just swipe it all away and have mad sex on the table. Like, and like, that happens, you're like, that's right, that's how it's supposed to happen every night, because that's your expectation Like everybody knows that's that ain't never gonna happen in a relationship. If that happens in your relationship, like, let me just say this as a guy, we all hate you, okay? We can never really receive love when it's based on expectation. Let me put it like this, like, I've never gotten a perfume-laced letter with a bouquet of roses from my mortgage company. Like, I've never opened it up and said, "Dear Mr. McCormick, thank you so much for being so faithful in paying your mortgage payment on time. We are so proud of you and Shayla and all that you're doing to help Chase become the international banking giant that it is. And because of your faithfulness in this relationship, we've sent you a gift card. And if you ever have kids, we would love to know about it because we would pay your hospital bills." Like, they don't ever send me a letter thanking me for my mortgage payment every month. You want to know why? Because that's the expectation of what I committed to. Am I not right? You want Chase to give you a call? Miss your mortgage payment. Like, you will get some personalized one-on-one attention. You'll get letters. You'll get phone calls. Like, you'll get all kinds of attention. And some of you in your relationships, that's exactly how your relationship feels. The only time you get any attention is when you don't meet the expectation. It's because you found yourself in this debtor relationship where these desires has shifted because nobody gets credit and feels love when expectation is on the relationship. And as long as your thoughts are here, you will never have intimacy. You'll never have community. You'll never have the love that you've always dreamed of because you're constantly focused on what that person owes you. Yeah, one person is like excited about that. You never, ever will. And anytime you have this legitimate desire that migrates over here, man, it just destroys marriages, destroys friendships, destroys families. Listen, this applies to every aspect of life when it comes to relationships. And what happens is we just cover over a lot of this stuff and say, well, that's not true for me. But it is true. And here's the thing, what I'm saying is that desires are good things. Listen, these things all started off as desires, like what we're going to earn, where we're going to live. Like, they just got to shift back over here. Because what I'm saying is, like, man, you're not to have like this vanilla marriage where you're not to have any of the desires. But what I am saying is that these desires that we have, they're God-given desires. Like, God instilled the desire for companionship within us. God put the desire for love within us. God put the desire for intimacy within us. God put the desire for a better life within us. God put the desire to be understood within us. And like, these are good desires and they're healthy desires and we should have them in all of our relationships. But when we start shifting it from a desire to an expectation, all of a sudden it just jacks every single thing up. Because the moment I put these on the shoulders of my spouse, I give them an unbearable weight that they can never meet up to. And every time you put this on the shoulders of your friendships and of your relationships and of your spouse, you put an unbearable weight on them that they can never live up to. And so how do we know that we're shifting these things in our lives? How do we know that these things have been shifted? And also, I think it's also the way that we solve the problem of moving expectations back to desires. And it's a couple things. I think number one is that, man, we've got to go and look at our gratitude. For a lot of us, when we've shifted our desires to expectations, we have a lack of expressing gratitude for what's happening around us. And what happens is for a lot of us, what happens is the menial things that our spouses or our friendships or our relationships do, they get neglected. Like, we're no longer appreciative of the fact that they took out the trash for us, or we're no longer appreciative of the fact that they did the laundry. Like, that has become an expectation. And so we don't any longer recognize the fact that they've done something for us and appreciate them for the fact that they're doing something for us. And we need to say, man, thank you so much. Because what happens when we thank them is we go back to it's not an expectation anymore, it's a desire. And so when you do that for me, like, I'm thankful because you're not hitting par anymore, you're going above and beyond par. And all of a sudden, intimacy and companionship starts to be recreated back in our relationship. And so my question for all of us is, like, when is the last time you said thanks? When's the last time you said thanks for cleaning up the house and picking up your dirty underwear off the floor? When's the last time you said thanks for your spouse always picking up your kids after school or taking them to school? When's the last time you said thanks to your spouse for coming home? Because a lot of us spouses don't. When's the last time you said thanks for a really good conversation that you had? Like, when is the last time we appreciated the person for the menial things that we take for granted now because they're no longer desires in our relationship, they've become expectations. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why David all the time in the Psalms would say, like, give thanks to the Lord. Like, he was constantly going, man, give thanks to God, for he is good. Like, his mercy endures forever. His faithful love endures forever. He's remembering in all the little minute things that God is good, because what happens in our relationship with our spouse, in our relationship with our friends, or a relationship with God is we get to this point, we just expect them to do things. And so, man, I prayed that prayer, God, I just expect you to answer it. Instead of remembering, man, every good and great thing that God has given us, thanks God for giving me some breath today. Thanks for getting me up this morning and not letting me have a heart attack and die. Like, thanks for my car starting with 197,000 miles on it today. Like, seriously, like, when's the last time that we've been appreciative to God for all that he's done, or have we put some expectations that, man, this is just how life should be all the time? Second thing I think that we have to look at is this lack of acts of service. Lack of acts of service. And here's what happens in relationships a lot of times is we see something that needs to be done, and we expect the other person to do it. And I'm so guilty of this. Last night, I probably tell a story about this every single day. Maybe some other husbands can feel me on that. But last night, we'd gone to Adopt a Block, and we had served out there, and it was awesome. And it was only like 427 degrees, and it's cool. We got to invite people to church, and if you've never been to Adopt a Block, check it out. But we came home, and we were kind of hanging out. We were waiting for the Notre Dame football game because that's all that mattered yesterday after Adopt a Block is Notre Dame beating Michigan. All you Michigan fans, you suck today, okay? Like, Notre Dame, go Irish. And so it's my cheat day for my diet. And Shayla goes, let's order a pizza. And I was like, that would be awesome. And she goes, okay, I'll order it. You go pick it up. And I was like, no, you're going to order it and pick it up. I know I'm horrible right now. And while you're there, you're going to give me a brownie too. Like, I had all these expectations and demands on her. And horrible. And so she's pissed, you know, like, when you know, like, she doesn't say anything, she just leaves and kind of slams the door behind her. Every husband has had that experience. If you haven't, it's coming, okay? And so she slams the door, and I go, oh man, I'm doing this whole message tomorrow on this, and I'm screwing it up right now. God, thank you for examples every day. And so I'm feeling so horrible, and then I'm like, what? Like, I need to show her how much I appreciate her. And so I got up and I started folding laundry and taking out trash. And because we just get into this mentality a lot of times that we just expect the other person to do for us. And we just take for granted the fact that, man, The role of being a spouse in a relationship is not about meeting your desires, but meeting the desires of the other person. It's about serving them. And I love what Ephesians 5:33 says, however, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself. Which honestly, like, guys, if we were to really take that into account, like, most guys love themselves a lot. Like, think about it. You'll stand in the mirror and you'll check yourself out for 10 minutes. You'll suck in your gut. And I lost some weight, you know? And like, you just love yourself. Every guy's smiling right now. And he says the wife must respect her husband. And I think about those things, and I think it's easy for me to love myself, but it's really hard for me to love somebody else. And the greatest way I can serve my wife is by loving her. And the greatest way my wife can serve me is by respecting me, because I know that every guy is looking for from their spouse is that they have a wife that thinks that they rope the moon and honors and respects them. And the greatest way we can get back to this idea of service is to put down those expectations and go, you know what, I'm gonna love unconditionally my wife, and wives say, you know what, I'm gonna serve my husband by respecting him in a way that's honorable to God, because that's what he says is the greatest way to communicate my affection for them. And to shift these expectations that just creep into our relationship back over to where they should be as desires. And that's the dilemma of this whole thing, is shifting them back. And just for a moment, my hope for all of us is that we would just dream for a moment. And we would imagine a marriage where everything in our relationship stayed right here. Where there weren't any expectations put on our spouse, but they all stayed desires. That we could imagine a relationship where all the dreams and all the things we could accomplish and all of the desires that we have wouldn't become burdensome to the other partner, but that they would stay in a place where we could celebrate them. And when they would accomplish those things, man, it would just engulf and inflame the love of our relationship. It'd be like pouring gasoline on a burning hot fire and just seeing it go more and more. I want to imagine a marriage that isn't about a contract of, if you do this, then I'll do that, but a covenant where I'll do this no matter if you ever do that. And so my question for all of us today, especially those that are married, is what expectations are you putting on your spouse right now? Maybe if you're a single person or you're dating somebody, what expectations are you putting on that person? Maybe there's some other relationships in your life. Like, what are the expectations? Where has the shift happened in your life? What does your spouse owe you? Husbands, what does your wife owe you? Wives, what does your husband owe you? And the answer to that question is going to reveal what's came here from here. Let's pray. God, we just come before you today. And I just know that today, more than anything, Lord, you want us to have healthy relationships. And I know that there's people that are walked in here today struggling, that there's been tension in their marriage, that there's been tension in their dating relationships, and it's probably because there's been some shift from some things that started off as really healthy desires. In fact, things that you put inside of us that have shifted to be expectations, and now we're demanding that of them just so they can meet par. And it's destroying the work that you're trying to do inside of each one of us together. And Lord, I just pray today That as we examine our hearts, God, that you would move, that your Holy Spirit would reveal. But more than that, God, that we would start to shift our expectations back to desires and see you work in our hearts and in our lives and in our relationships like never before. It's in Jesus' name that I pray.